What is the most important game, not the biggest, the most important game for Tennessee this year? That's Eric Cain, Locked On Vols, joining me to discuss. When I think about Tennessee's SEC championship and playoff hopes, Eric, you got to be in the 10-win range in the regular season. I don't think 9-3 puts you out of the playoff discussion in the SEC. I also don't think it is a lock that 9-3 gets you in. I think it is more likely than not 9-3 misses the playoff, even with an SEC or Big Ten schedule. So if you're thinking about Tennessee going 10-2, I'm penciling in, I'm really writing in pen that at Georgia is going to be a loss because I'm not going to pick anybody to win in Athens this year. So I look at the games at home against Alabama and at Oklahoma. You do a coin flip on which of those games is the most important one for Tennessee this year. What do you think?
Yeah, like I want to say, it's funny. I was kind of talking with a colleague about this earlier today, and we were kind of debating back and forth. Like Tennessee likely could be favored at home against Alabama, depending on what happens up to that point. Tennessee on the road at Oklahoma, I could see Tennessee being a dog, right? Because it's the first SEC game, it's on the road, all that type of stuff. But I truly think, I hate to do coach speak here, but I mean Oklahoma comes first. Oklahoma's the first game on the SEC schedule. It's the first true road game of the season, the first true road game of Nico Iamaleava quarterback's career. That's a huge game for Tennessee. And I think when you look at the rosters, I mean, I haven't done my deep dive into Oklahoma just yet, but when you look at the rosters, I like Tennessee's roster better than Oklahoma. I like Tennessee's quarterback better than Oklahoma. I understand Oklahoma's got some shuffling on the offensive line where, Tennessee's added one, but it's a real good one in Lance Hurd from LSU. I think Tennessee's more grouped and composed compared to Oklahoma, if that makes sense. But I think that's a huge game. I mean, put aside the storylines of Josh Heupel going back home, Bob Stoops, all that type of stuff. I mean, the national media is going to be, hitting us over the face with that all summer long and leading up to that game. I just think that's a huge game because it leads you right into the off week for Tennessee, the first one. Then you go back on the road at Arkansas. Say you struggle at Oklahoma. I mean, Arkansas is not a good football team, but, I mean, Tennessee needs to win that game as well. So I think simply because it comes first, it will set the tone for what's another, daunting SEC schedule for Alabama at home the third Saturday in October, for Florida the week before that, and other big games against Kentucky, and then, of course, Georgia later on. So I'll say Oklahoma, though I still think Alabama is going to have a great roster. I still think Alabama's got a good quarterback, and that's going to be a very challenging game.
Yeah, and I hear you on the first one. I think I lean Alabama here, and allow me to explain why. If you go into that Oklahoma game at 3-0, which they should, like the honorable mention games here for most important that we'll talk about in a little bit are the NC State, which is essentially a road game, but not technically, and then Florida, just because it's a massive rivalry, and Florida's not a great team, but they're also not a bad football team per se, as Tennessee learned a season ago. I think that when you have Oklahoma earlier in the year, if you lose that game, then the Alabama game is, the importance of that becomes magnified. But if you win that game against Oklahoma, I still think Alabama is the more important of the two, because then you have a chance to be undefeated before you go and play at Georgia on November 16th, because the games sandwiched in between there are Kentucky at home and Mississippi State also at home. So it'll have been a minute since they've played a road game, because they have 4 straight SEC home games, which is bizarre, but it's certainly a break for Tennessee schedule-wise. So I think regardless of the outcome of that Oklahoma game, their playoff and SEC title hopes are alive. But I think the stakes, certainly if you lose that Oklahoma game, of the Alabama game are heightened, because then you have Georgia on the schedule. But I also think that if you win that Oklahoma game, the ceiling on what Tennessee can accomplish this year, everybody's got to remember, their win total is 9.5. It's the second highest in all of college football. There are big expectations for the Vols this year, even with a new quarterback that they're working in Nico Iamaleava, who certainly looked good in the bowl game trouncing of Iowa last year. That's why I think I lean Alabama. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, those are good points. And, to be a good, guy on the debate team, which I was not, I was not on the debate team, but you got to be able to argue both sides of the coin. So I hear what you're saying, and I think home and away comes into a big focus here when we're talking about if you're on that fringe of the college football playoffs. Say Tennessee has a road win at Oklahoma. If Jackson Arnold, that's early in the season, say Jackson Arnold turns it around or starts to evolve into who we think he's going to be, and it's like, man, that win looks really good for Tennessee and on the road as well. And say you lose that Alabama game at home, that's when you can really point to and say, well, that's a big win for Tennessee, who may finish at 9-3 or 10-2. But you're right, you win that game and you go into a huge rivalry game, third Saturday in October. Say you take care of Florida, and we'll speak on in a moment. You don't want to lose that game at home because you'll be favored. You potentially could be undefeated. And this is kind of a new era of Alabama football. Still, I think that roster is good. Jalen Milroe's going to be one of the best players in the country.
Kalen DeBoer is very good.
Yeah. I mean, he's being knocked before he even comes to the SEC. All you can do is coach where you are, and he's done a great job so far. We'll see how it translates, but at least that roster in 2024 is still going to be really, really good. So I can see both sides of it for sure. I just think that that could be a marquee win that you pick up earlier in the year that can be kind of a saving grace for you, but also just it's a tone setter because if you go on the road and handle business against Oklahoma, you should have no issue with Arkansas on the road. You should have no issue with Florida at home, and you should give Alabama, everything they can handle at Neyland Stadium.
Let's hit the honorable mention candidates that I talked about. Florida at home. That one isn't, potentially a most important game because of the national ramifications, but more about the personal ramifications. It's Tennessee, Florida. Like that game at home, you can't have a stumble there. It's one thing if you stumble at home against Kentucky, and that wouldn't be great for the Vols with the expectations and potential they have going into the season. But that Florida game's one. But that second week game, I think one of the more under the radar non-conference matchups, NC State and Tennessee. You can highlight Oklahoma as the most important game on the schedule, and I hear that. Or you can highlight Alabama. Tennessee is not going to, nor should they, nor can they afford to overlook NC State. That is a good football team.
Yeah, no doubt. It got better, significantly better at quarterback in this offseason. We know that with Grayson McCall. They finished last year hot. They did pretty well in the transfer portal.
Very well.
All things considered. Yeah, that's a big-time game. And for sure, Tennessee can't afford to overlook that. It's away from Neyland Stadium, but it's not a true road game. So that, and Tennessee fans will travel, and it'll be great. But I do like Tennessee's makeup so much more. I like Tennessee's roster so much more. But that's not a gimme. And I mean, Tennessee will be favoring that game, I would imagine, but it's not going to be any more than 6. Probably somewhere around there.
I would frankly be surprised if it's even that high. I bet you it's closer to 3 or 4.
Yeah, and I mean that's going to be a big time game. But and this is where you get in trouble as fans and media alike. We assume that's going to be a win. You can't assume. You got to go play that game. But that is a huge game. And depending on how Tennessee plays in that game and how Nico looks, and again, not a true road game, but how do you handle the environment? I mean, athletes, regardless of sports, are all about routine, and how do you handle the not in the hotel before the morning break, all that type of stuff. It's a big opportunity for Tennessee. How you perform in that game obviously is going to be detrimental in terms of how you're going to perform a couple weeks later at Oklahoma. The Florida game at home, as you said, I mean, it's Tennessee, Florida. And from the outside looking in, it's a huge rivalry game and everything, but you'd be shocked if I told you that since 2004, Tennessee only has 2 wins against Florida. Last year, Florida was not good. Tennessee lost that game because Tennessee loses so many games to Florida that Tennessee shouldn't over the years. Florida, again, Billy Napier's coaching for his life. I think that Florida's much better at the quarterback position than anybody will give him credit for with Graham Mertz. They've got some pieces. Again, like you said, they're not a bad team. They're going to be in desperation mode, but it's going to be at home. The last time these two teams played at Neyland Stadium, Tennessee won, albeit Tennessee tried to give it away and only won by like 4 points at 34-38 after leading 38-21 with a couple minutes left. But that's going to be a huge game simply because history is not on Tennessee's side as it never is. But I mean, Tennessee should handle Florida if you have any hopes of being a college football playoff team for sure. And then, of course, you mentioned Kentucky, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. What Florida is to Tennessee is what Tennessee's been to Kentucky. Tennessee's own Kentucky. There's only like 2 or 3 wins dating back to like 1984 that Kentucky owns over Tennessee. So, couple big time games at home at Neyland Stadium that they've got to handle. But again, if you're a college football playoff caliber team, you should handle those teams. You should have no issue with those teams. But as we know, there's nothing guaranteed in the SEC.
Absolutely not. Eric Cain, locked on Vols. He's always guaranteed to give us a good segment as usual. Eric, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Spencer.